Hello, thanks for joining us. Wow, we're over 400 people so far. All right, we have a lot to pack in, so we're gonna go ahead and start diving in. If you haven't already, please put your name and where you're coming in from, your hometown, in the chat. My name is Molly Goldberg. I am with the Progressive Change Institute, and we are so thrilled to have Congressman Jamie Raskin back with us tonight for our National Democracy Briefing. We'd like to thank our allies at Way to Win for co-sponsoring this event as well. I know we're all super eager to hear from Congressman Raskin and his perspective on the state of democracy, but before we begin, I'm just going to go over a couple housekeeping notes. First, we really want tonight to be interactive, so if you're comfortable doing so, we'd love you to turn on your camera so we can see your beautiful faces. Next, if you have a question for the Congressman, please send it in the Zoom chat with your hometown and state. You can view the chat by clicking the button with the dialogue icon at the bottom of your screen that says chat. If your question is selected, including everyone who submitted one on the RSVP page, the amazing Hannah will message you to make sure you're ready to ask your question live. Then we will unmute you on the call during the Q&A portion. We won't call on you unless you reply to Hannah's direct message. So just remember to keep an eye out for that in the chat area. And for everyone joining via Facebook tonight, you can also ask questions by commenting on the Facebook live stream, and we will read them out loud. Feel free to ask your questions at any point during the call, but please keep them between 10 and 20 seconds so we can get through as many as possible. We have a really fun tradition. There's still, I see some people filtering in, but we're going to unmute everyone and just for a few seconds so we can give a big warm hello to Congressman Raskin and to all the progressives with us in the audience. So on the count of 3, let's all say hi to one another and give a cheer to our democracy hero, Jamie Raskin, and turn up the energy.
Hey.
Hello, everyone.
We're so proud of you.
We're so proud of you.
Such a good Jamie Raskin.
You are one of my.
Thank you for all you're doing.
Great to see you, Jamie.
To see you.
Oh,
Jamie.
Feeling.
Okay, that was amazing. Thank you, everyone, for the warm welcome for Congressman Raskin. I am now going to turn the floor over to Adam Green, co-founder of the Progressive Change Institute, and he's going to set the stage for our talk tonight.
All right. Thanks so much, Molly. It's great to see everyone. It's great to hear everyone. That was awesome. We are thrilled to be joined by such a boisterous crowd tonight to welcome Congressman Jamie Raskin. And some of you might know, a little over a year ago, we held a national democracy briefing with Congressman Raskin on January 13th, 2022. And similar to tonight, hundreds of people joined live for the Zoom, and ultimately over 100,000 people watched that town hall meeting, that briefing online, because they were so interested in what Congressman Raskin had to say about the state of the world. At that event, Jamie Raskin made some national news that was reverberated for months and months, where he predicted that the upcoming January 6th committee hearings would, quote, blow the roof off the House, which they did. They possibly changed the outcome of the 2022 elections by making sure that people understood the stakes for democracy and the fact that democracy was on the ballot. And the reason that we're doing this event tonight is that so much has happened in the fight for democracy since those January 6th hearings and since the 2022 election, where so many people on this call really helped to achieve a clean sweep of victories in the Secretary of State races across the country, as well as electing John Fetterman to the U.S. Senate, getting many great people elected to the House, and helping Democrats keep democracy alive, at least for a couple more years, and hopefully for many, many more. And we conceived this call several weeks ago after Tucker Carlson released highly edited versions of the January 6th committee, January 6th video. And we thought, people probably want to know what Jamie Raskin has to think about, what has to say about that. And then in the last couple of weeks alone, so much has happened that speaks to our democracy still being in the balance. We've seen very overwhelming evidence in the last couple of weeks about Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas and being corrupted, contributing to this court's increasing legitimacy crisis. We've seen progressives win the Wisconsin Supreme Court in a very important race a couple of weeks ago. We saw Tennessee Republicans declare war on democracy, while new Democratic legislators in places like Michigan and Minnesota are working to bolster democracy with their new trifectas. We saw Trump indicted, and we've seen Fox's lies revealed about our elections, about our democracy. So again, we just had a hunch that many people would want to hear what Jamie Raskin has to say about all of this. And again, given by the number of RSVPs on this call, I think we were right. So we're thrilled to join with our friends at Way to Win because they're working to build progressive infrastructure and restore democracy at the state level. We will also have a couple surprise guests on this call, so stay tuned for that. But without further ado, I'm really proud to introduce a leader who inspires so much appreciation, admiration, love, loyalty from so many Americans and his colleagues, someone who really needs no introduction, our dear friend and ally, Congressman Jamie Raskin. Jamie, what is the state of democracy in America? What are the challenges before us?
Adam, thank you for having me. Molly Goldberg, thank you too for putting this together. Thank you for that rousing coast to coast welcome, everybody out there. That's what it sounds like when I walk over on the GOP side of the aisle, but just the opposite. Like they're waving at me, but they're not using all of their fingers. So it's very nice to get home to this great welcome from Way to Win and the progressive change nation that's out there. I'm delighted to be with everybody. I mean, the state of democracy is whatever it is we're doing today to defend democracy and freedom. And don't forget the connection between them. I mean, Abraham Lincoln answered that back right at the beginning of the Civil War when somebody said, you know, you keep talking about the Declaration of Independence and the rights of the people, but how come you don't talk about the Constitution? Isn't it the Constitution that governs? And he said, you know, the relationship between the Declaration and the Constitution is the relationship between freedom and democracy. He said the Constitution is like a beautiful silver platter, but upon it rests the golden apple of freedom. And freedom is what we are defending with democracy, because we're not going to have freedom without democracy. And the women of America know that now because of all of the gerrymandered legislatures and stolen elections and the gerrymandered Supreme Court. And now we're in a situation where women's freedoms, women's basic rights are under attack all over the country. So democracy and freedom go together, and they stand best when they stand together. So what is the state of democracy in America? We are in the fight of our lives, my friends, and it is Donald Trump's cult, the cult of authoritarian personality, which used to be Lincoln's party, and all the other cults of the country that they have magnetized and drawn in towards them, versus the Democratic Party. And, you know, this is something I really got through my clashes with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert on the floor. Maybe some of you guys saw this, but they kept deliberately mispronouncing the name of our party. They call us the Democrat Party, and they talk about the Democrat Congresswoman and the Democrat plan. And as you know, I gently tried to explain to them for a long time, when it's an adjective, you got to say the Democratic Party and the Democratic Congresswoman, but they still kept doing it. And so I had a little bit of a epiphany, because I was reading this great book about Franklin D. Roosevelt called Traitor to His Class by H.W. Brand. And I realized something in reading Roosevelt's speeches, which is he didn't call us the Democratic Party, much less the Democrat Party, which is what they call us over there. He called us the democracy. And he said that the economic royalists and the plutocrats say you invest in the wealthiest people in society, some of the wealth will dribble down on everybody else. But the democracy says you invest in the great American working middle class, everybody will rise and everybody will prosper together. That's the doctrine. And that's what provoked Lauren Boebert to say, well, in my case, call me MAGA, but don't call me MAGA, call me Ultra MAGA. That's what I am. And I was only too happy to comply with the gentle lady's wishes. So when you refer to her, call her ultra mega. That's who she is. But Adam called me when all this first started with Speaker McCarthy just giving the congressional property in our stationary Capitol Capitol camera footage to one media entity, to one guy, Tucker Carlson, okay, which was absolutely outrageous and scandalous. Now, the background, of course, is that thousands of hours of video footage had been released, not just from the Capitol footage, but also from the insurrectionists themselves, from the police body cameras, from all the media that were there. In other words, it was a completely documented event from beginning to end. But if there was anything that they thought had somehow been suppressed or missed by the January 6th committee after a year and a half of bipartisan work and release of more than, of the work, the evidence of more than 1,000 witnesses, 100 subpoenaed witnesses, and most of these people were members of the Trump cabinet or the Trump White House or the Trump family. They really thought something was missing. They should have released it to the whole world. Instead, they give it to one ideologue, an ideological mouthpiece, Tucker Carlson, who's just a propagandist hitman for Donald Trump and the right wing. And then they send their team in there, and then they go through thousands of hours, and they are able to come up with a few minutes of some bizarre, distorted footage of the QAnon shaman, which is supposed to show something. And then they talk about this as somehow an answer to the January 6th committee, which is just ludicrous and absurd. They didn't lay a glove on our story, which was objective and factual and documented in nature. And of course, his stupid propaganda hit piece, Patriot Purge, which suggests that it was really Antifa or it was really rogue FBI agents or whatever, all of that has completely vanished since Adam first had the idea for this. But the struggle for democracy is continuous. And, we've discovered a lot about Fox News since Tucker Carlson and all of those other reporters have been exposed as complete frauds, since they were totally debunking and contradicting Donald Trump behind his back and talking about how much he hated his guts and how they couldn't wait to get rid of him. But then, of course, because they were afraid that their cultish audience that they had cultivated for Donald Trump would abandon them, they had to continue propounding Donald Trump's big lie. But they just paid more than $750 million in a record settlement, the largest payout in a libel action by a defendant media entity in the history of the United States of America. In fact, probably in the history of the world. But none of them wanted to take the stand to have to be forced to testify about all of those things that they had to admit to in the discovery process in deposition. The whole right-wing movement, from Donald Trump through the Fox Corporation, all the way down to the members of Congress and the Senate, all of them have wrapped themselves around lies. The big lie claiming that Donald Trump really won an election, which he lost by more than 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College. And then the big lie about January 6th, which we all knew was a violent insurrection on the heels of an attempted political coup, as they tried to get Vice President Pence simply to set aside the Electoral College votes from Arizona, from Pennsylvania, from Michigan and Wisconsin, and to declare Donald Trump the winner. And that's, of course, why they had to drive Mike Pence out of the chamber chanting, "Hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence," because on that day, the normally invertebrate Mike Pence decided to stand up for the Constitution, and for that reason, he was demonized and castigated and scapegoated by the Trump mob. But in any event, we know exactly what happened, but they have to continue to lie about it. So, my friends, we're in a struggle to defend democracy, and we're in a struggle to defend the truth against a regime of lies. A whole party that has literally no platform. They passed no platform in 2020, but whatever lies Donald Trump tells them, they will embrace as the gospel. Let me just say a final word about the courts, because I know we're going to talk about it tonight. The struggle for democracy all over the world, you will see against the despots like Putin in Russia and Bolsonaro, who was, in Brazil before the election, Orban in Hungary, Netanyahu in Israel. The struggle for democracy is also the struggle for judicial independence and the integrity of the rule of law and the legal system. And we are dealing with that in America today, as we are dealing with right-wing packed, gerrymandered Supreme Courts. The Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland, should be on the Supreme Court, but when he was the chief judge of the DC Circuit and was nominated by President Obama, they did not even give him a hearing a full year before the end of Obama's term, saying it was too close to the next election. And yet when Amy Coney Barrett was able to get on her seat with the untimely death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, people had already started voting. It was just a couple months before the election. And so what we're talking about is people who have no respect for the rule of law and will do anything for power and for their power. And it makes sense, because I'll close with this thought, Adam. We are the vast majority of America. Every public opinion poll shows, just like the last election showed, where we're beating them by millions and millions of votes, just like we're seeing in Wisconsin, just like we're seeing in Arizona, just like we're seeing all over the country. The people are on our side, which means they have to depend on what? A bag of tricks. And all of them are tricks of anti-democracy. The gerrymandering of our legislative districts and our congressional districts, right-wing judicial activism to try to shut down people's voting rights, voter suppression tactics, the filibuster, you name it. You name me a minority anti-democratic tactic or technique. That's what the GOP lives on. So it is a race between the Democratic Party, which is the democracy today, against the plutocrats, against the cult masters, against the right-wing corporate chieftains that want to use government for their own purposes. And I'll close with this thought. You know, I've been on this for several years, but Donald Trump, when he was president, converted the presidency and the government into an instrument of private self-enrichment. That's the struggle in America today, between the democracy and the idea that the government has got to be an instrument of the well-being of the people, the common good, versus the idea that the government is simply an instrument for money making for the guy who gets in there and his family and his corporations. That's the struggle in America today, and it's the struggle in 2024. I'm delighted to be with you.
Thank you, Jamie. That was very comprehensive. We're going to go very quickly to our first special guest, because she actually has to go in a couple minutes. You mentioned the word power. We have someone who is now part of the Democratic trifecta in Minnesota, who's about to walk onto the floor there and listen to the Democratic governor talk about the state of the state. But I want to welcome State Representative Emma Greenman, who is shepherding a suite of democracy reforms through the Minnesota legislature. So Emma, take it away.
Well, thank you. And it's always a pleasure to be able to hear from Congressman Raskin, who has a Minnesota connection that I'll let him tell you about. But I just wanted to say thank you to all of you. You know, 2022 democracy was on the ballot. And in Minnesota, we elected a pro-democracy trifecta, and are doing with it know that our obligation here is not just to do all the important work, but to choose democracy, choose multiracial democracy. And so we passed the Democracy for the People Act off the House floor in last week, and hopefully we'll do that in the Senate, and really know that the world and the states are watching what state legislatures are doing, and know that it's our obligation in the state to say every opportunity we have to choose multiracial, multi-generational, gender inclusive democracy, we will do that. So I wanted to thank all of you for all you've done, because we know 2022 really was in Minnesota. Democracy was on the ballot. And it is why we are able to now go and move forward and say, we see what's happening in Tennessee. We see what's happening in Wisconsin. We see what's happening in Arizona and Georgia. And Minnesota wants to be the North Star along with Michigan and some other places, and say, we will show the way and support our congressional partners and everyone else. But just wanted to say thank you and apologize that I'm gonna have to run, but we are hopefully gonna hear about voting rights in our state of the state from Governor Walz.
Fantastic. Thank you, Emma. Emma, in 15 seconds, you just want to give people the top 3 things in your bill that you passed, just so people are aware?
Yes, automatic voter registration, voter protections and protections for election workers, and a ban on foreign influence corporations to ensure that foreign influence corporations are not controlling our elections.
Cool. Well, thank you for your leadership. Really glad you were able to
Thank
join
you.
us tonight.
Thank you,
Okay.
everyone.
Awesome. And to keep the focus on the states, definitely want to introduce our partner right now, Tory Gavito with Way to Win, to ask the first question to Congressman Raskin. Tory?
Hey, thank you, Adam. Thanks for allowing us the honor to co-host this event. What a privilege to be able to witness the hero's welcome that was given to Congressman Raskin. And I think each of you deserves a moment of celebration. This last few cycles have demanded so much of all of us. We have all worked so hard, but I want us to remember that we're winning. We won in 2020 by picking up new states. We held off a red tide in 2022, and we're winning big policy and governing opportunities. We just heard about that in Minnesota. Think about Michigan, think about Chicago, think about Wisconsin. Democracy is on the rise. However, we at Way to Win aren't satisfied with protecting the status quo. We want to expand democracy even in GOP territory where winning coalitions can be forged. We've seen the proof points in places like Arizona and Georgia. The work to expand democracy is increasingly dangerous too. We know this from the work that Congressman Raskin has been leading, because the GOP is always ready to activate hate. But we will continue to take action. Democracy is action. At Way to Win, we support the heroes that with scaled resources like bold candidates, organizers, and communicators. We are all needed to expand our democracy and upend politics as usual. At Way to Win, our research and data shows us promising paths in the states to expanding democracy, including in new states by using these moral moments like the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, the attacks on abortion rights, the GOP's ongoing alliance with the NRA. With these moments, we confuse a winning coalition between new voters and traditional voters. Gen Z and young people more broadly prefer Democrats by a 28-point margin. And we know that traditional voters, moderate voters, increasingly are opposed to anti-democratic politicians. For example, Latinos in my own community, we are the true swing vote in this country, have very strong feelings about authoritarian regimes. They do not want to ban books. They do not want to attack the press. They don't want to expel legislators that they disagree with, for example. When we bring together the new voters and these traditional voters, we are unbeatable, even in states that have historically been out of reach, bringing us all one step closer to a true multiracial democracy. And so it's an honor to ask a question of Representative Raskin as we celebrate the advancements in places like Minnesota and Michigan and Wisconsin. What about places like Tennessee and Florida, our southern and western states that are home to some of the fastest growing communities? We know there are 1,000 kids being born into the electorate every day into Texas. What role can the federal government play in protecting democracy in these emergent states and everywhere?
Well, of course, the South is where the civil rights movement is born, and the West is where populism and progressivism began. So there are great historical roots for progressive resurgence and renewal in precisely those places. And we're seeing it in Tennessee, and we're seeing it in Arizona, and we're seeing it in Texas, where I've got, amazing new colleagues from Texas who are serious organizers and serious fighters who are, doing an amazing job, like Greg Kassar from Austin and Jasmine Crockett, and just amazing, members of a younger generation of organizers who are building up. Look, the federal government, the Department of Justice has got to defend voting rights around the country, because the GOP has made it clear that they're not interested in expanding their coalition, just in the same way that they just keep talking to the Fox News audience. They're just trying to hold on to those people. And then their political strategy outside of the Fox News audience is voter suppression, and just strategic suppression of the vote, manipulation of the state legislatures, which is coming with, their whole theory that the state legislatures can control the electoral college vote, their manipulation of the electoral college, all of that stuff that we got to get ready for. But meantime, we have to keep taking democracy seriously. And as you say, bringing in more and more people and not leaving any state, any county, any town or city behind. I'll use this as an opportunity just to plug Democracy Summer, which is the project I've organized, which has now been adopted by the DCCC, where we send out through our representatives in every congressional district in the country, young people, college and high school age kids, to go and organize. So if you've got young people in your life that you want to be part of the democracy freedom struggle, have them check out Democracy Summer.
Thank you so much, Adam and Tory and Congressman Raskin. I'm seeing so many amazing questions rolling in the chat. It's hard to keep up. We have over 700 people on Facebook Live, and we've been around 600 people on Zoom. So very excited that you all could be with us. I just want to give a quick reminder to everyone on how to submit your questions and what to look for if your question is selected. So for those of you on Zoom, please put your questions in the chat along with your name and hometown. If your question is selected or you pre-submitted a question on our RSVP page, make sure you keep an eye out for a direct message from Hannah. She will confirm that you're ready to be unmuted so you can ask the Congressman your question live. And if you're tuning in from Facebook, ask your comments in the questions so we can read them aloud. We'll start off with the first question. Darren from Chicago. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Unmute. Like the Tennessee Three, it seems that progressive voices get drowned out by the radical right, Republicans, and centrist Democrats alike. How do you envision the progressive movement combating this and gaining a stronger voice? Thank you.
Well, awesome question, but I think the Tennessee Three demonstrate precisely how you do it. I mean, these are people who were anchored in massive popular outrage and a movement in Tennessee with a lot of young people in it to confront the merchants of gun violence down there. And they didn't break from the movements and they didn't break from the people. And when they got sent back to their districts, the district sent them right back into the legislature. And that's the spirit. But understand what they're really up against in the legislature is gerrymandering. Because I mean, those margins are just lopsided and ridiculous. Now, the right-wing Supreme Court took itself out of gerrymandering, saying it's a, quote, political question. It's up to the states to deal with, which means we've got to go state by state, either using state legal action and state Supreme Courts or massive popular action to sweep away the gerrymandering. But the GOP now stands for the gerrymander only party because they live on that. They thrive on that. So we're just going to have to be tough. We've got to be nimble and we've got to use whatever means are available to us. But remember, the people are on our side and the musicians are on our side and the artists are on our side. And we've got to use all of American culture to take America back from these people because they are fanatics, they're extremists, and they're corporate authoritarians.
Thank you so much for your question and for your answer, Congressman Raskin. Next, we have Sharon from California. Are you able to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, I'd like to unmute.
We can hear
Hi,
you.
Jamie. Can you hear me?
I gotcha, yes.
I just want to say you look great. Hope you are feeling great as well. My question is in regards to Clarence Thomas and what can really be done about him. For 20 years, he has flaunted the law. He's above the law. And I am so sick and tired of hearing the Justice Department saying no one's above the law, yet I see so many people who are. What can we really do about Clarence Thomas?
Well, first of all, thank you for your kind words. And I also want to thank everybody from Progressive Change who signed that beautiful Valentine to me, telling me, wishing me well at the beginning of my journey in chemotherapy. On Friday is my very last session. The doctors tell me that the chemotherapy has extinguished the cancer cells, at least as far as they can tell. It's almost extinguished me in the process, but I'm hanging in there and I'm going to make it through. And so I want to thank you guys for standing by me and standing with me this whole time. And they promised me that my eyelashes and my eyebrows and my hair will come back one day soon. So fingers crossed there. Look, I'm totally with you on Clarence Thomas. It's a maddening thing. And I think that we're going to have a special guest who's going to help us address that. Adam, I don't know if he's here with us, but we've got a friend from the Senate who is going to talk about that. But I guess, you know, what I would say is the only court in America where there's no binding code of ethics with a system of actually holding the judges responsible is the Supreme Court. They decide whether they have a conflict of interest in their own case, and they decide whether they're going to recuse or not. So you could view the Supreme Court itself as a lawless institution with respect to the ethics of its members. And now these disclosures about Clarence and Ginny Thomas's relationship to this billionaire who flies them all over the world in vacations and actually engaged in cash transactions secretly with Clarence Thomas to purchase family properties and put money in their pocket, it's just outrageous. I mean, Justice Fortas was forced off of the Supreme Court for doing much less than that. I think he made a series of lectures at the law school where I used to teach, American University, Washington College of Law, and had some relatively modest professorial payments made to him. And when that came out, he was forced off the court. And look where we are with Clarence Thomas today. So it's an absolutely outrageous situation. So we're going to talk to the leader in the Senate on trying to demand a real ethical regime on the Supreme Court tonight.
Well, that seems like as good a segue as any, Jamie. We do have a special guest on. I'm hoping that he's ready to go. Folks might be familiar with Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, who is chair of the Judiciary Committee Subcommittee on the Federal Courts. He has been talking about this hospitality exception that Clarence Thomas and others have been taking advantage of for years. And this is his moment. He's holding Justice Thomas accountable. And we're thrilled to welcome him. Senator Whitehouse, are you on?
I am on, Adam. How are you?
Good to see you.
Good to see you. And I'm super excited to be here with Jamie Raskin, who was one of my total heroes and who I watched perform just astonishing feats of statesmanship and scholarship in the Trump impeachment saga.
Hello, dear Senator Whitehouse. Thank you for
How
your
are you,
leadership,
pal?
man. We
You
are
and
so
Adam
glad
Schiff
you
are
were
fighting
there.
it out as my favorite lawyer in the House.
Well, thank you for rocking the Senate every day. And please tell us, is there any chance that we could actually move some meaningful legislation commanding some kind of ethics regime on the Supreme Court? Is there any way we can make that happen?
I think there is. I don't know what happens to it on your side of the aisle. The problem here is that the Supreme Court is so politicized that virtually no Republican is going to take misconduct by the Supreme Court seriously while their big donors are controlling the Supreme Court. I come from Rhode Island. It's a nautical state. It's a sailing state. It's the ocean state. In the old days, there was a thing called letters of marque. You could basically go seize a ship, take it as your prize, and then get authorization to sail it as a battleship. And more or less, that's what's happened to the Supreme Court. It's been seized by the billionaires through this Federalist Society scam of the list and all of that. And now they've got a supermajority, and they take instruction from this flotilla of completely phony front groups that come in and tell them what to do, instructions that they obey with amazing statistical regularity. And they're doing what the big donors of the Republican side want. So if the big donors on the Republican side are going to keep funding the Republicans in the House and in the Senate, they have to shut up and support them and let the court do this stuff. So it's going to be tough to try to get 10 Republican senators to try to blow through this. It's going to be tough to see if we can use the so-called nuclear option. But there are ways to do it. And I think, frankly, the legislative pressure is super important to putting Chief Justice Roberts on the hook for making the long overdue responsible decision to have himself and his fellow justices answer to the basic principles of ethics oversight.
So do you believe that the legitimacy of the Supreme Court, which is in the gutter today, creates the possibility for us to advance a vision of the Constitution and take it to the people to say that the people really need to demand constitutional ethics and public accountability, because it just doesn't make sense to wait for the court to do anything at this point.
Yeah, I think we have two key audiences here, Jamie, and one is the public. And unfortunately, both our party writ large and most of our advocacy groups have for years overlooked the problem at the Supreme Court. It's been problem 6 or problem 9 for them. Their key issues have always been their key issues, rather than agreeing together that this politicized court, this captured court, is a menace to all of them and taking it on as a significant common cause. So that's one very important part, is to get the word out to progressives that this is a fight we need to have, and it needs to happen across the issue spectrum. Every issue that we care about, this court is out to compromise. The second audience is the judges. And that's where it gets really interesting, because other judges are sick to death of the shenanigans on the Supreme Court. They're all under an ethics code. They're all subject to investigation. They all know perfectly well that what's going on at the Supreme Court is wrong and unacceptable. And they've been quiet about it for a long time. But I think that Thomas exploits are, for many of them, a bridge too far. And I think that's one of the reasons you saw the Judicial Conference slap back the Supreme Court by changing the by clarifying the personal hospitality rules to shut down this comically false reading of those rules that Roberts was taking advantage of. Sorry, Thomas was taking advantage of.
Can I keep going, Adam, or there's more?
Yeah, keep going, and we'll open it up for questions after one more from you. This is great, Jamie. Thank you.
All right. Well, Senator Whitehouse, people contact me every day saying, "Can we just impeach Thomas?" Or they'll talk about other judges, but of course, I tell them just consult the Constitution. I mean, we would need a majority in the House in order to do it. They're talking about impeaching Joe Biden, and they do have this slender majority that includes George Santos and Lauren Boebert, who we almost beat last time. I mean, we got to win back the House, people, and we need to enlarge our majority in the Senate. And of course, we've got to reelect Biden. But we can talk about impeaching Thomas, sure, and we could introduce resolutions, but none of it goes anywhere given the arithmetic in the House today.
Absolutely correct. And that's why I think looking at other means of applying pressure is really important. We've asked the Senate appropriators who oversee the court and provide its funding to put a hold on the funding for the Supreme Court until it adopts a proper ethics rule. Are we likely to actually pass that and make them camp out on the street and hold their arguments, on the Supreme Court lawn while they get their act together to be able to get their funding to pay their bills and reopen? No, but every move in that direction puts pressure on the court. And
one move in that direction is what a lot of the state bars were doing with Trump and Trump's lawyers, which is to bring disciplinary proceedings against them and to move to have them disbarred for violating the ethics codes of their states. And the District of Columbia bar has been moving strongly against some of those people. And so that's something that could be done. It would be purely symbolic, of course, because Clarence Thomas doesn't have to be a member of the bar to serve on the Supreme Court. And, given the utterly degraded state of the GOP, they're not going to care.
Well, if you look at the ethics in government law, it also provides an opportunity for the Attorney General to investigate and to assess civil penalties for willful failures to file. And there's just no doubt that this meets any reasonable standard of willfulness. It's repeated, it's year after year, it's across multiple different failures of disclosure, and it is really flagrant violations of incredibly obvious and clear rules. So I think if the Attorney General would take testimony from other judges, he'd find them throwing Thomas under the bus pretty fast. So that could happen. It's a bit of a stretch, but a false statement is a false statement, and that's 18 U.S. Code 1001, and that's a criminal penalty. So there's a lot of pressure that can be brought to bear, and I think it's important now that we bring pressure to bear on this court from every available avenue, because we can no longer tolerate a court that lives in an ethical vacuum and responds only to its creepy billionaire big donors who put them on the court.
And Senator Whitehouse, can you just tell our members what is the current plan in the Senate for hearings around ethics or Thomas?
Chairman Durbin has announced that he will hold a hearing. I believe he's announced that it's going to be in this work period. And I know that we are working with him on witnesses, because he is, I think he's announced, he's told me anyway, that it's going to be a joint hearing of the full committee and the court subcommittee that I chair. So I think it'll be a pretty robust hearing. And bear in mind, something this complex, you're not going to solve in one hearing. This is going to be a continuing process. Some of the hearings will be at the full committee level. Some of the hearings will be at the court's subcommittee level. But we're going to continue to plow through this and do the basic work of preparation and investigation that is necessary. Look how much work Jamie and his team put into preparing the impeachment of Trump. That's the kind of preparation we have to do to prepare for a meaningful hearing on the ethics calamity at the court.
Thank you. All right, well, we're going to let you go in a second. Jamie, is there any final word you want to say to Senator Whitehouse before he
No, let's just thank Senator Whitehouse for keeping so much in his mind and in his heart the framers' vision of a Supreme Court that would actually have integrity that the whole country would be able to look up to. And so he stands in the very best traditions of the history of this court, like the Brandeis tradition and the Thurgood Marshall and William Brennan. And today's court is utterly degraded and prostituted and corrupt. But we can't give up on it because it's our Supreme Court, and we've got to take it back from the people who have completely derailed it from its real purposes. So thank you, Senator Whitehouse, for what you do every day.
Yep. Thank you, Senator Whitehouse, for joining us. Means a lot.
Great to be with you, Adam. Many thanks.
All right. I think we have a question from the crowd. I believe Anna Wolf from California. If you want to unmute yourself, you should be able to ask your question of Congressman Raskin.
Hi. First off, Mr. Raskin, I wanted to thank you for your grammar comments to the banana Republicans. That was actually the best thing I heard all year. I'm still laughing about it. My question is about McCarthy. Is there any way that we can censure McCarthy for what he did in releasing those videos to something which everyone knows isn't even a real news outlet?
Right. Well, I mean, as long as they have the majority, we're not going to be able to do a formal censure, but certainly, we can censure him with our remarks, and we can castigate him for what he did. I mean, look, if you wanted just to release the video, and most of the footage, by the way, is just a camera of an empty hallway because it's all over Capitol Hill. And so most places were not invaded by the insurrectionists. And of course, they didn't want to show any of the violence and any of the officers being smashed over the head with Confederate battle flags and Trump flags and so on. They wanted to show a scene of the QAnon shaman being shepherded towards, I think, the chamber, which took place after all of the violence was over. So they removed all the timestamps and everything. So look, it was an utterly fraudulent enterprise they were involved in, and they haven't shown anybody their work, and they've just kind of vanished with their tail between their legs. But it does show how much Kevin McCarthy has sold his soul to the MAGA wing of the party in the so-called Freedom Caucus, which is really the anti-freedom caucus. And fortunately for us, he gave each one of them their own committee, their own subcommittee, their own promise to go to the DC jail with a group to have a hearing on this or that. And it's utter pandemonium. And it is just like the Tower of Babel. And one of them said to me on the way in, we're going to do to you what you did to us with the January 6 hearings. And it's been quite the opposite. In the January 6 hearings, we had a bipartisan committee, as much as they didn't like that. We proceeded in a totally methodical and professional and rational way. We showed all of our evidence to the country. We operated over a year and a half. And all they have is a bunch of partisan slams that don't make any sense, and each of them competing with each other. And if they had one good hearing, nobody would even know, because it's buried in just the chaos of everything that they say every day. So, of course, because they have no program and no agenda for the country, they have no moral compass in what they're doing. And they're just trying to see if something will stick. Hunter Biden's laptop, or, let's attack Washington, D.C. We were on the floor again today as they're trying to attack D.C.'s police reform legislation, but it doesn't make any sense to the public. There's no coherence to it.
Well, thanks again for all your work.
Thank you, Anna. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Anna. Next, we have a question from Facebook from Sharon Gordon. Sharon says, there's ethics problems in every branch. Why is insider trading legal in Congress? If you want democracy, Congress members should not be able to use their positions where they have conflicts of interest in bills they vote on. It's not just SCOTUS.
Yes, we totally agree with that, and are fighting to ban day trading and individual stock trading by members of Congress. It makes no sense. I mean, America's a country where people can go out and try to get rich if they want to, but the whole design is, if you aspire and attain to public office, you are a servant of the people, and you must act as a servant of the people, and you should be thinking about one thing and one thing only, which is how to serve the public. And this is why I'm so adamant that we get out the information. And I promise you, we will get out the information about Donald Trump's collection of not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, but millions of dollars from foreign governments, including Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, China, Indonesia, while he was president, money pouring into the hotels, the golf courses, and the other Trump businesses. And that's not even to mention what happened immediately when they left office, of course, when Jared Kushner brought home a cool $2 billion from the Saudi sovereign fund, that is from the Saudi government itself, into a new hedge fund that was created by Jared Kushner the day after the Trump administration ended. He registered that company and brought in $2 billion. Now, if all of this doesn't sound like a violation of the Foreign Emoluments Clause, then it's clear that the Republicans have done whatever they can effectively to keep people from understanding our own Constitution. But this is the original anti-foreign bribery provision in American law. And it's right in the Constitution, and it says that none of us in public office, and certainly not the president, may accept a present, an emolument, which means a payment, an office or a title from any prince, king, or foreign state. And yet that was the whole business model of the Trump administration, which converted the presidency into an instrument of money making. And there's no other way of understanding that. So I'm totally with the question. Nobody should be dealing in stocks in Congress. The president of the United States should not be able to be in business at the same time that he is the chief executive officer of the government of the United States.
Thanks, Jamie. We're now going to go to our partner at Way to Win, Tory Gavito, for another question for you.
So I think we're all eager. I think we were all a little disappointed yesterday when we heard about the settlement in the Dominion lawsuit, because we wanted to hear Rupert Murdoch on the stand. And curious, given the, the legal pressures that Fox News is facing, the legal pressures that Trump is facing, can you speak to that? How do we use this moment? What do you think's coming down the pike?
Well, Tory, I mean, but I was actually very cheered by it. I was expecting like maybe 200 million or 300 million, but $770 million is extraordinary. I mean, the annual revenues of Dominion Voting, I think, are $100 million a year. So it was the next best thing to having Rupert Murdoch and Tucker Carlson on the stand, where they would have had to admit that, yes, they hate Donald Trump. They said they hated Donald Trump. They're terrified of Donald Trump. And yet they continued to broadcast his big lies because they thought that that's what they needed to do in order to maintain that ideological and cognitive stranglehold over Trump's cult following in the country. So instead of telling people the truth so they could disengage and get deprogrammed, instead they kept programming them with Trumpian ideology. And you know what? They're still doing it today. They showed us it's worth almost $1 billion for them to hang on to that audience. And if you turn on Fox News tonight, they will not utter a word about the settlement and about them admitting that they lied to their own public about who really won the election and the election being stolen. Well, look, I think we have to make clear to people that there are just two parties in America. There's the party of democracy with all of our flaws and all of our imperfections, but we are the party of democracy and freedom. And then we've got an authoritarian cult, and they've got a very strong propaganda network in the Fox Corporation. And that's a model for politics that the right wing has exported all over the world. I mean, that's what's going on in Russia with Putin, and in Hungary with Orban, and in the Philippines with Marcos, and in Egypt with El Sisi. Right-wing, authoritarian, minority government that is preying on people's racism, on people's misogyny, on anti-LGBT propaganda. That's all they got. All they've got to sell is hatred. Well, meantime, we're the party of democracy, which means we've got to face the real problems of the world and the country. Who's dealing with climate change? Not the kleptocrats in Mar-a-Lago, not the autocrats in Moscow, not the theocrats in Saudi Arabia. It's Democrats, small d and big D Democrats all over the world. We're the ones facing the problems of inequality. We're the ones trying to make education work. We're the ones that are trying to make government work at a time of profound environmental crisis. So first we got to save our democracy, and then we've got to save our species by dealing with climate change in a really systematic and thorough way, and through solidarity with people all over the world who are in the exact same leaky boat that we're in.
Bravo.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, well, we are about to wrap up. Jamie, thank you so much for this wide-ranging conversation. We really covered a lot of ground. Just looking at the comments, people are so thrilled to hear from you and are rooting for you. So let me just turn it over to you to offer any final thoughts to our membership.
I can't believe we got to go. I was just warming up, Adam. You know, we didn't talk about guns yet. Let me just say one thing about this, because to me, this goes right to the heart of the social contract. I mean, if you read any of the social contract theorists like John Locke or Rousseau or Hobbes, all of them said we enter into a social contract because if we stay in the state of nature, it will be like a state of war. The Hobbes called it solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So we enter into a social contract together, so we'll be safer. But the social contract is not making our kids safe in school. It's not making anybody safe when they go to church or mosque or synagogue or the Walmart or a movie theater or a grocery store. If we've got maniacs with assault weapons running around, and we don't have a universal violent criminal background check, and we've got the loosest gun laws in the world, and we have more than 20 times the rate of gun violence and gun deaths that they do in our European peer counterpart countries. And I've got my colleagues running around on Capitol Hill telling the lie that this is required by the Second Amendment, and we would have to repeal the Second Amendment to change things. No, I'm not asking them to repeal the Second Amendment. I'm asking them to read the Second Amendment about a well-regulated militia being necessary to the survival of a free state, and then the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The Supreme Court has said that that accepts reasonable gun safety measures, including universal violent criminal background check, including assault weapon bans, which have been upheld everywhere. And yet my colleagues get up on the floor and they say, well, no, the purpose of the Second Amendment is to allow the people to overthrow the government of the United States. Really? Is that why it says in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15, that Congress has the power to call forth the militias of the state in order to suppress insurrections? Really? Is that why Section 3 of the 14th Amendment says if you've sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution and you engage in insurrection or rebellion, you shall never be allowed to hold office again in America? Is that why we have the treason clause, which describes treason as raising arms against the United States? It's utterly absurd. It's ridiculous. The Constitution does not give you the right to overthrow the Constitution. That's not how it works. And we've got to defeat that insurrectionist philosophy, not just to explain to them what was wrong with what they did on January 6th, but also so we can pass the reasonable gun safety measures we need to keep our people safe. So look, Adam, thanks to you, thanks to everybody out there for hanging tough every single day for democracy and freedom. But remember, we're in the fight of our lives, and we owe it to these great young people who are getting galvanized and mobilized right now to help educate them, to help get them ready for the struggles ahead. But we've got to win. It is the responsibility of our generation, the people who are middle-aged and beyond, to defeat Trumpism so the young people have a chance to confront all of the other problems in the country. Thank you, Adam, and I yield back to you.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I just want to say we've had at the peak over 800 people watching on Facebook. We've had over 600 people watching here on Zoom. A huge thank you to Congressman Raskin, Senator Whitehouse, Tory Gavito with Way to Win, Representative Greenman, and Adam, of course. And many thanks to all of you for being with us. Let's end the evening. Once again, we'll unmute everyone so we can all say goodbye. And thank you to Congressman Raskin and everyone who's with us.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Raskin. You're a hero. Thank you so much.
Best thing that we have.
Much wishes on your
Jamie. We love you.
Thank you.